Welcome to WhiskyCast, cask strength conversation featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie, and this is episode number 1032 for November 26th, 2023. Coming up in a few minutes.
My mum and dad and David's mum and dad have been great supporters of what we have started here, and they've always supported us in what we've done. They do still think that we're mad in terms of what we're doing.
Fiona Boyd-Armstrong is one of a generation of Northern Ireland distillers helping to revive the country's distilling heritage. At one time, Belfast and the surrounding counties led the world in whiskey production, but over the last century that dwindled to just one distillery, Bushmills. I was in Northern Ireland earlier this month visiting distilleries, and that story's coming up later on WhiskyCast In-Depth. I'll also have the What I'm Tasting This Week department, Behind the Label, and much more. The news is next on this week's WhiskyCast.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
The average college basketball power forward is 6'9", which, according to my rough calculations, is 16.5 times my height. I'll stick to aimlessly pottering around in back gardens.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast, Redbreast. Pass it on.
Greetings, everyone. It's Gabriel Cardarello with Jewers, and I have big news. Jewers is about to unveil the first chapter of a 4-part collector series dedicated to honoring the most famous whiskey-producing regions of Scotland. More on that in a bit.
Let's get started with the week's news. It's brought to you by the Dalmore. Chivas Brothers is facing the potential of labor strikes at its facilities in Scotland through the holidays. The two unions that represent about 800 Chivas Brothers workers at distilleries and bottling plants both voted in favor of strikes after rejecting the company's most recent contract offer. Unite and GMB Scotland will both have to give 2 weeks' notice before strikes, and a Chivas Brothers spokesperson says any strike won't disrupt holiday orders, since those have already been shipped out. The UK's Chancellor of the Exchequer, Jeremy Hunt, gave whiskey makers a break Wednesday. In his autumn budget address to Parliament, Hunt announced a freeze in excise duty on alcoholic beverages through at least next August. Whiskey makers had been preparing for another tax hike on the heels of the record 10.1% excise duty increase imposed this past August. Scotch Whisky Association CEO Mark Kent welcomed the decision.
Obviously, you never know what the result is going to be until you hear the chance to get up on the floor of the House of Commons and announce things. But we think we welcome it because we think that apart from obviously being good news for our industry, it's good news for consumers. It means that it's good news for the fight against inflation. The previous 10.1% was quoted by our Office of Budgetary responsibility as fueling inflation, and also it helps the industry bring in more investment and create more jobs. So all in all, good news, we think.
Kent says there's still work the Chancellor can do to make the tax burden fairer for distilled spirits compared to other alcoholic beverages. Whiskeys and spirits are taxed far higher than beer, wine, or cider. 8 U.S. distilleries are being recognized for their energy conservation. The Environmental Protection Agency granted Energy Star certifications to Heaven Hill's Bernheim Distillery in Louisville and its Deep Eddy Vodka Distillery in Texas, along with Bardstown Bourbon Company, the Jack Daniel Distillery, Rabbit Hole Distillery, MGP's Lux Row Distillery in Bardstown, Kentucky, Heaven's Door Distillery in Pleasureville, Kentucky, and Seattle's Westland Distillery. Last year, the agency worked with industry leaders on a series of best practices for distilleries to save energy and cut carbon emissions. Last month's flooding in Middleton, Ireland has had a larger impact than first announced. While the main Middleton distillery escaped flood damage and is back in production, the Middleton Experimental Microdistillery suffered extensive damage, along with the Visitors Center, according to Powers distiller Eric Ryan.
Kind of getting back on track. The newly revamped visitor centre is not reopened yet, but I believe it's, probably around February, I was told, but hopefully we'll get it back sooner rather than later.
And the micro distillery was damaged too, right?
Yeah, and still out of action at the moment. I haven't seen a full report on that yet. A lot of the pumps got damaged, so there's going to have to be a bit of work done in there as well, so it could take a bit of time before it's back up operational.
On another note, Middleton Master Blender Billy Layton is stepping aside for a new role. He'll be Master Blender Emeritus following 47 years with Irish Distillers and will continue to work on special projects for the company. Dave McCabe has been promoted to Master Blender, and we wish them both the best in their new roles. Ireland is cracking down on alcohol advertising. New legislation signed into law by Health Minister Stephen Donnelly takes effect January 10th. Under the new law, alcohol ads on TV will be banned between the hours of 3 a.m. and 9 p.m. Radio ads will only be allowed between 10 a.m. and 3 p.m. In other news, Suntory is raising prices for 19 of its whiskeys in the Japanese market. Yamazaki and Hakushu 12-year-old single malts will get a 50% price hike, while Hibiki Japanese Harmony will see a 36% price hike starting next April. The biggest increases are for Suntory's premium whiskeys. Hibiki 30 years old and the 25-year-old editions of Yamazaki and Hakushu will more than double in price to $2,400 a bottle. Berry Brothers and Rudd is celebrating its 325th anniversary with an exclusive Lafroig bottling. The 1999 single cask was selected by Berry Brothers chair Lizzie Rudd. Only 232 bottles will be available through the Berry Brothers and Rudd website at a price tag of £800 each. And speaking of Lafroig, the distillery is introducing a new archive collection with a 36-year-old single malt. 6 different distillery managers watched over the whiskey during those 36 years. Members of the Friends of Lafroig get first crack at a ballot for the bottles starting on Monday. There's no word on pricing. Diageo has released this year's collection of Distillers Edition single malts. The annual series includes bottlings from Lagavulin, Oban, Talisker, Glenkinchie, Dalwhinnie, and Cragganmore, all finished in a variety of casks. On the bourbon front, Rabbit Hole is out with Amburana, a Kentucky straight bourbon finished in Brazilian oak casks. It's the 7th release in Cave Zemanian's Founders Collection series. Just 2,176 bottles will be available for sale in select markets. The recommended retail price, $1,100 each. You can keep up on the latest whiskey news all week long at whiskycast.com and in the WhiskyCast community app. The news is brought to you by the Dalmore.
Hello, Richard Patterson here, Master Distiller, Master Blender for the Dalmore. You know, whenever the team and I are in the world sharing our exceptional single malt, we like to keep in touch with Mark Gillespie and the latest news from WhiskyCast.
Let's take a look at the calendar of upcoming whiskey events going on around the world. We're getting into the holiday period now where there aren't a lot of events on the schedule. Whiskey Fest Las Vegas is set for this coming Saturday night, December 2nd. Julio's Liquors in West Hampton, Massachusetts has a Horse Soldier bourbon tasting on December 6th, along with a Dalmore tasting on the 13th and a Kentucky Owl tasting on the 22nd. The Whiskey Exchange in London has its annual Christmas Barrel Top tasting coming up on the 7th. After the holidays, a few tickets are still available for the Victoria Whiskey Festival, January 18th through the 21st in Victoria, British Columbia. If you're organizing a whiskey event, let us know about it. We'll add it to the calendar at whiskycast.com and in the WhiskyCast community app.
At Dewar's, we're gearing up to unveil a prestigious 4-part collector series of exceptionally high-end blended malts. The first gem in this collection, none other than the extraordinary Dewar's Double 37-year-old, a blended malt that is nothing short of remarkable. The Double 37-year-old undergoes Dewar's cutting-edge 4-stage aging process, meticulously designed to draw out the essence of whiskey barrels dating back to the late 80s. The result? An impeccable balance and a level of smoothness that is off the charts. To pay homage to the Speyside whiskey producing region, it gets an extra tip of the hat with the finishing process resting in Oloroso sherry casks that once cradled the prestigious Altmore single malt whiskey. As for the taste adventure, brace yourself for captivating notes that include the warmth of cinnamon, the velvety sweetness of heather honey, succulent juiciness of peaches, zesty pops of orange peel, and a decadent shower of brown sugar. And let me be clear, I'm merely giving you a glimpse of the sensational flavor adventure this whiskey has in store. This exceptional whiskey, though, is a rare find, so stay vigilant and find it at a store near you.
WhiskyCast In-Depth is brought to you by Mortlock and the Classic Malts lineup. Earlier this month, I spent a few days in Northern Ireland visiting distilleries as part of a press trip organized by Invest Northern Ireland, which works to promote the country's businesses. Northern Ireland has seen a resurgence in distilling over the last decade as part of the island's overall boom in whiskey making, and the distilleries range from large to small, and in the case of County Down's Killowen Distillery, very small. At Northern Ireland's smallest distillery, well, let's just call Killowen Ireland's smallest distillery, period, Donnie McGravy's tours include an impromptu pipe concert. He plays the uleen, a rare type of bagpipes in which the air is forced into the bag by a bellows strapped to McGravy's elbow. One could say it requires a lot of elbow grease to play.
The Irish word for church is kill. And so there was St. Feckin. You have to be very careful how you say that now. The remains of his church are about 250 metres in that direction. You know, the parish is called Kilbrony. Again, church, the Church of Brona, the Church of Feckin. Killowen, the Church of Owen or Sean. Right, so we're surrounded with Christian churches in one sense. But on your way up here, you've passed something of a much more ancient religion, because half a mile back down the Kilfegan Road, there is Kilfegan Dolmen, which is a Neolithic burial place, 4,500 years old or thereabouts.
The Irish haven't been making whiskey for quite that long, but there was a time when the 6 counties that now make up Northern Ireland dominated the Irish whiskey industry. Over the last century, that dwindled down to just one distillery, Bushmills in County Antrim. But small-scale distilleries like Killowen have been reviving that heritage. Killowen's distillery is just 10 meters square, plus a shipping container on the side of the building.
Where we can, we'll use local grain. For example, there was a charity threshing day down here in Killowen, and all the corn that was obtained from that, Brendan bought for usage here, so that we could have a very definite local stamp on one of the iterations of our whisky here. The grain. So again, Killowen tends to look towards the style of whisky that made our Irish the best whisky in the world, the pot still whisky. Pot still whisky meaning the current suggestion is that it's just malted barley and ordinary barley with a wee hint of something else. Brendan tends to go for a broader mash bill or recipe. So we would use our malted barley, rye, wheat and oats in larger percentages than we're supposed to be honest, you know. So again, it must be milled on site. The grain must be milled on site, hence this roller mill. And it will mill the grain into a sort of like almost like a heavy porridge, not milled down to flour, but to almost like a porridge, you know, a dry porridge consistency. The water and the grain meet in this mash tun. And if you visit the big, huge distilleries, you will see these massive mash conversion vessels, with great big lauter and semi-lauter for mixing the mash. Here you can see we use elbow grease, right? So, God help them, the boys and girls here have to mix the mash using this. Mixed for a couple of hours or so. And what's happening there, this is where the malted barley starts to produce its magic. The enzymes contained in the malted barley work on the other grains to draw fermentable sugar out of the grain. Because what we want is sugar. Then, when the mixing process is over, it's sieved here, and the liquid drops into the bottom cylinder and is then drawn off. What's left is draff, what we call draff. That's given to local farmers because it's absolutely wonderful feed for sheep and for cattle, and they're delighted to get it. Okay. The wort is a very sugary, high sugar, like syrupy liquid, which then is drawn off and put into our fermentation vessels. At that stage, the yeast is cast. We need the yeast to work on the sugar to produce alcohol. The yeast, we actually leave our fermentation tanks outside with the lid off sometimes for 3-4 hours, depending on the climatic conditions. Obviously, we're not going to leave them if it's lashing with rain or snow or anything like that. But the idea there is to capture wild bacteria and local bacteria and wild yeast, which we feel has a definite impact on the final spirit. Fermentation, probably we would leave the fermentation for about 7 days. Fairly long fermentation period. That again has an effect on the taste of the final spirit. There's just so many things that can affect the taste long before the spirit hits the wood, which we will talk about. So when we have that, our wash, that then, at the end of the fermentation period, we have our wash, which is essentially a beer. It's a beer at about 8 to 9% ABV, which is 19-20 proof. Okay, you can drink it. It's not too bad actually, but you wouldn't want to pay too much for it. It is strong, but it's not that unpalatable. So then we have our beer or our wash. Wash goes into the first still, the wash still, which is here. Now these are copper alembic stills made in Portugal. And I think we're the only distillery in Ireland which still uses gas, flame-fed, to boil the contents of the still. I think Glenfiddich in Scotland still use, gas-fed, the flame-fed system to heat the contents of the still. So essentially, we boil the kettle.
Killowan's bottlings don't stay available for long. They tend to be snapped up by members of the Killowan cult, the distillery's fan club. Co-founder Brendan Carty's job is keeping the cult happy.
We're tiny, but we make a hell of a lot of noise. We've no marketing budget, but we just have this really strong cult following, and they've manifested themselves as the Killowan Cult Organisation, who are just a wonderful bunch, and they're a worldwide group, yeah. Much of them are in Ireland, much of them are in the United States, and then Italy as well, Sweden, Australia. They're brilliant. They're a brilliant bunch, but we've got a very small amount of stock to work from.
Killowan is just one example of a decade's worth of investment in the whiskey sector. Ian Joinides heads up food and drinks marketing efforts for Invest Northern Ireland.
As a region, we've gone from having really just Bushmills, probably 2012, Ecklandville being the first distillery to achieve a license to distill in over 100 years within Northern Ireland. They opened their doors in 2012, and since then we've seen it's kind of paved the way for more and more distilleries. So we have a mixture of, we really have everything. We have a mixture of, quite ambitious, relatively large-scale craft distilleries and new starts like Ecklandville, Hinch, Some really exciting projects like Belfast Distillery, who are producing McConnell's Irish whiskey, and Titanic, and they all kind of bring something different to the table. We've got some really small, really kind of artisan distilleries, really innovative, interesting stuff like Cullowen down the Mourne Mountains. And I think, each of them are bringing something different to the table. So you've got people like Belfast Distillery and Titanic who are doing really interesting things with old buildings, kind of sort of leaning on the industrial heritage of Belfast in particular, and kind of trying to, sensitively bring buildings back to life that really wouldn't, if not a distillery, it's hard to think what those buildings would do apart from just sit there. I mean, the Pump House is an amazing piece of architecture.
The Pump House is part of the Thompson Dock in Belfast's historic shipbuilding quarter. It was built to support the giant dry dock needed to build the Titanic and is now home to Titanic Distillers, which opened earlier this year. Damien Rafferty is the head distiller.
It's a perfect home for our brand as Titanic Distillers to be in the building that would have serviced the Titanic ship over a century ago. We're very lucky to be here, and our directors have had great vision to put a distillery in this place to bring back to Belfast that heritage of distilling that a lot of people forget, that we were such a powerhouse so long ago, and now we're back in the city making whisky. The building itself, 1907 was the day, was when it was constructed, and now we've built this beautiful distillery situated on 2 levels above some heritage equipment. And it's, as you've seen for yourself, it's absolutely a wonderful triumph of engineering as well as history.
How hard was it to actually build a distillery on top of all the existing equipment that was left behind?
It was very challenging. What you're seeing now is the result of a 5-year-long project. The building was in quite a lot of disrepair, so there was a lot of effort put into restoring the roof and what have you, and different elements of the fabric of the building. And then the engineering of the steelwork and how that was all bolted together was quite a challenge. And then the logistics of getting it in. So we had to get this existing crane above our heads from 1907 recertified to allow us to get all the elements of the steelwork in, as well as the brewing vessels and the stills. So there's a lot of challenges and a lot of headaches, and our opening date was pushed out quite a bit, but it's a labour of love.
And you just opened the stills and started production just a few months ago.
That's right, yes. The 1st of August was our first mash, and then the 17th of August was our first still run. So it was a great day for Belfast, the first legal distillery in Belfast in almost 90 years. So we're very proud to be here today.
Belfast Distillery Company had hoped to claim that title, but construction at the old Crumlin Road jail has taken longer than planned. That's to be expected with a Grade A listed historic site, but master distiller Graham Miller and his team have managed to build an entire distillery inside one of the jail's wings.
One is that we had to get approval for any and all changes from the original building. So even just to put this wall light on, for example, that has to go to HED, the heritage architects. And that was just a list of, I don't know how long it was, hundreds of elements. The steelwork, the lights, everything. I suppose in practical terms, the biggest challenge was the actual demolition, because we had to hit key dates to free up areas, for example, to put in the grain handling. So you're trying to get through stone walls that are 2 feet thick, granite. Everything's different as well, so you couldn't make a standard jig to support the ceiling above. Everything had to be done one cell at a time. The biggest challenge was actually the ceiling. It was about 1.5 feet of reinforced concrete as a ceiling, which we didn't realise until we started to try and get into it. So lying on your belly in the small space in here, just above us, with a Kango hammer at your ear for 3 weeks, basically. So the guys have done a brilliant job, and it's been a summer of dust and gravel and rubble, but we've thankfully we're on the other end of that now, so we're able to get the fit out. This is actually what we're seeing here now is the start of the fit out, so we're through that.
The distillery is scheduled to start production in January and welcome visitors starting in the spring. What does it mean to bring distilling back here after 100 years?
Well, I mean, it's amazing for us to be able to do it because if you think back to the end of the 1800s, going into the 1900s, Belfast was actually probably the biggest supplier of whisky to the world. So the big names like Dunville's, McConnell's, the Avenil Distillery, they were all active right into the 1930s. So, and usually not their fault really that they went out of business. There's different stories depending on which company that you want to go and study. But to bring it back, I mean, it's definitely what I do. I'm a distiller and I'm from here. I grew up in Glengormley, which is only 5-6 miles away from here. So yeah, it means the world to us. And we also want to develop the folks from North Belfast area and train them to be distillers, and bring those skills back, so that means a lot to us as well.
Reclaiming heritage and creating jobs was also on the mind of Fiona Boyd Armstrong. Her family owns the Redemon estate in County Down. She and her husband David persuaded her parents to let them build a distillery on the estate.
For us, we love distilling, and obviously we've started out as a gin distillery and now we've progressed to a whisky distillery, and for us it's all about the flavours and each step of the process in terms of how we make our short cost whisky.
How did you convince your father to finally go along with a distillery?
I'm still not sure he's still convinced about the distillery, but my mum and dad and David's mum and dad have been great supporters of what we have started here, and they've always supported us in what we've done. They do still think that we're mad in terms of what we're doing, but it takes a long time in terms of making our whisky. We'll make it from day one, and it's not until a minimum of 3 years and 1 day before we can actually call it an Irish whisky.
Where we are now, from the folding doors back, is the building that we converted back in 2013 into our still house. Now, we're fully manual here. There's no process automation. Everything that we do from creating of our gins and our whiskies, our poitíns, is all about what we do with sense of taste and sense of smell. So there's no process automation here. So even as Tom, you look above you on your left, on your left hand side, Tom's mashing in by hand. Everything here is done with a personal touch. He's very good. He normally ignores everyone. I am joking when I say that. So guys, what we have in here in front of you, we have our original 450 litre copper pot still. This is the still that we still use and love to create our short cross gin on, and it's actually the still that we use to create our first batches of whisky. So when we laid down our first cask of Irish single malt whisky back in 2015, this was unquestionably the smallest whisky still used on the island of Ireland.
The Boyd Armstrongs launched their first whisky 2 years ago and now produce a single malt as well as a rye and malt whisky distilled from malted rye and malted barley, creating a new heritage for the next century of distilling in Northern Ireland. Thanks to all of the distillers who hosted us on the trip to Northern Ireland. Full disclosure, as I mentioned at the start of this segment, I was there as a guest of Invest Northern Ireland, but as always, full editorial control over the content of this episode remains with WhiskyCast. That's WhiskyCast In-Depth, brought to you by Mortlach, whiskey's best-kept secret. Hidden away for decades in some of the world's most famous Scotch whiskies, comes a single malt inspired by an original for a fortunate few. Discover the entire Mortlach lineup at malts.com. I'm back home in contest judging mode this week, but let's look at a couple of the whiskeys I tasted in Northern Ireland in the What I'm Tasting This Week department. It's brought to you by Sagamore Spirit. I'll start with the Killowen Rum and Raisin Single Malt. It's not a flavored whiskey, but it's named after the flavors that come from the PX sherry and dark rum casks that were used in maturation. It's bottled at 55% ABV, and the nose has notes of molasses, toffee, figs, and dates for a bright, complex aroma. The taste is thick and creamy with subtle hints of clove and allspice balanced by molasses cookies, honey, and vanilla. And the finish is long with lingering spices, toffee, and a touch of molasses. I'm scoring the Killowen Rum and Raisin Irish Single Malt a 93. Redeeman Estate Distillery's Short Cross Peated Irish Whiskey is 7 years old and matured in a combination of cognac and orange liqueur barrels. It's bottled at 46% ABV, and the nose has touches of orange marmalade, honey, dried fruits, and a hint of smoke. The taste has notes of orange blossom, honey, dried fruits, and a subtle smokiness that gets stronger leading into the finish, which lasts and lasts with a hint of orange blossom. I'm scoring the Short Cross Peated Irish Whiskey a 92. I'll have more tasting notes in just a minute, but first, our tasting notes are brought to you by Sagamore Spirit, a 200-time award-winning Maryland-style rye whiskey. With a determined focus to create the best rye whiskey imaginable, Sagamore's team of distillers crafts each spirit with a nod to both tradition and innovation. Find their signature Double Oak, Cask Strength, or Reserve Series rye whiskeys at a retailer near you. Just visit sagamorespirit.com. Please drink responsibly. We wound up the Northern Ireland trip with a visit to Two Stacks Whiskey, the independent bottler and blender in County Down. Got to taste a 12-year-old Irish single-grain whiskey distilled at Great Northern Distillery and finished in a Moscato wine cask. It was bottled exclusively for the Canadian market at 62.5% ABV, and the nose has a touch of lemon zest, along with vanilla custard and dried flowers. The taste is creamy with a subtle tartness and biscuity, with touches of vanilla, honey, and green apples. The finish, long and tart with a touch of citrus fruits. I'm scoring the Two Stacks 12-year-old Moscato wine cask finished single grain a 92. And from the south, Napog Castle's 21-year-old Irish single malt was on the breakfast menu last week in Fredericton, New Brunswick. It's bottled at 46% ABV, and the nose has touches of shortbread cookies, hints of lemon zest and white pepper, and a touch of fudge. The taste is fruity and floral with a nice underlying spicy character, and the finish is long and spicy. I'm scoring the Napog Castle 21-year-old a 93. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Sagamore Spirit. I'll be adding these tasting notes to our searchable list of nearly 3,600 different whiskeys from all over the world. Check it out this week at whiskycast.com.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
A thoughtful gift is hard work. What you need is a go-to multi-purpose gift for all occasions. A bottle of Redbreast can say, "Enjoy every minute, they grow up so fast." Oh. And equally nails, "Apologies for the back pain, I should have just hired a moving company."
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
Let's open up the WhiskyCast community app and see what people are talking about this week. Our community segment is brought to you by Waterford Whiskey. Saw this note this weekend from Travis Adams. Off to London for a week and then Dublin starting tomorrow. Nothing important here. I'm just posting this because years ago I would have panicked about this. I have nothing planned for London because it's trip 4 for me. I know the shops I'll visit. I've booked Jameson and Teeling and Guinness in Dublin. I'm sorted because of Mark and the others on this podcast. And I just want to say thank you. Glad we could help Travis, and thank you for listening. Last week we aired some views on packaging from folks attending the New Brunswick Spirits Festival. Chris Ratcliffe in London added his views in the app this week. I was thinking about the packaging debate around whiskey that's been going on recently. There's an obvious conflict where whiskey fans will say, "We just want the whiskey," while many brands will use packaging to stand out on the shelf and drive sales, especially in grocery stores where shelf presence is everything. For me, I like the design that goes into whiskey. If you are being truly focused on the liquid, then all spirits would go into a simple plain bottle with a black and white label. No round Blanton's bottles, no dripping wax on Maker's Mark, no fancy Hibiki bottles. The same can be said of the packaging. It is an extension of the brand and the ethos of the whiskey. Look at these Glenmorangie bottles and how many others to see how they pop. Heck, even the Macallan 1926 had labels designed by prominent artists. You can also look at the very high-end bottles, where some of the presentations can vary from no packaging through to custom wood cabinetry. Is it excessive? Of course it is, but high-end whiskeys by their nature are excessive. The important thing for me is that if you have cardboard packaging that is highly recyclable, so not plastic-coated or similar, then it has a limited impact. It's relatively low cost, low weight, and can be sustainably dealt with. Tins and the like, or any novelty that ends up in landfill, is less desirable, but is still part of the wider design language and experience of a distillery. The worst offenders have to be those gift packs with a couple of miniatures, some branded junk, and a big plastic molded inlay to display it all. Well, that's a lot to say, but Chris said it well. Ken Goldenberg from Orange County, California, added this comment. Hey, Mark, regarding the gift box and packaging debate for whiskey or any spirit, I'm going to take that one step further. I don't need the fancy bottles either. When I'm done with my whiskey, a sad moment, I am often left with this neat-looking bottle that I toss away into the recycle bin. I may feel a bit of remorse throwing away such a nicely designed bottle, but then again, I'm not a college student who's going to line up a collection of bottles on a shelf. I save my shelf space for my Disney collection and a few Lego models, after all. Got to remember that there are things people collect besides whiskey. If you'd like to be part of the conversation, download the free WhiskyCast community app from the Apple or Google App Stores and jump right in. You can also reach us on Instagram, Facebook, Threads, and X at WhiskyCast. The email address is comments@whiskycast.com. Our community segment is brought to you by Waterford Whiskey, on the web at waterfordwhiskey.com.
Every Irish single-farm origin gives completely different flavours when it's malted, fermented, distilled and matured. That's why we're exploring Irish terroir. Imagine how many flavours we find working with over 100 of them. Waterford Whiskey, the most naturally flavoursome single malt.
Let's close out the show now with Behind the Label, our look at the history, science, and people who make whiskey unique. The folks at James Eady Limited have done it again. Last year, they produced the book The Distilleries of Great Britain and Ireland, A Journey Through the Heartlands of Whiskey, 1922 to 1929. Now, they've teamed up with the British Library to digitize and publish The Distillation of Whiskey, Notes and Observations on its Historical and Practical Aspects, 1927 to 1931. Based on two separate series of articles published in the Wine and Spirit Trade Record and Ridley's Wine and Spirit Trade Circular. The book includes introductions by Dave Broom and Alan Winchester to put the articles into their proper context. 6 distilleries in Scotland have agreed to make experimental whiskies inspired by the book that will be released at various stages of their maturation between 2024 and 2032. The book is available exclusively through Royal Mile Whiskies, as will the Project 1927 whiskies. You can listen to my interview from last year with Leon Kubler of James Eady Limited about the process behind creating both books in episode 971 of WhiskyCast. It's available in the archives at whiskycast.com. If you have something you'd like us to look at on an upcoming episode, just get in touch with us. That's all for this week's edition of WhiskyCast. You'll find links for the stories in this episode in our show notes at whiskycast.com. That's also where you'll find the latest whiskey news, my tasting notes, the calendar of events, the whiskey photo of the week, and of course a complete archive of past episodes going all the way back to 2005. Get in touch with us on X, Threads, Instagram, and Facebook at WhiskyCast, or you can use the WhiskyCast community app. Download it today from the Apple or Google App Stores. Our email address is comments@whiskycast.com.
Dewar's Double Double 37-year-old blended malt whiskey is a true collector's treasure, a rarity worth hunting for and cherishing, perhaps sharing with the lucky few. Please drink responsibly. Copyright 2023 Dewar's Blended Scotch Whiskey, 48% alcohol by volume.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
Ever go out drinking with a peacock? always the same. Few too many, tail feathers come out, drinks get knocked over, bartender's not happy, night's over before it started. All I'm saying is, don't be the peacock in your group.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
WhiskyCast is a production of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2023, and comes to you from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening.